Some of you probably know that one task I absolutely hate is mowing my lawn, but I do like the look of a well-cut lawn. So I decided to do something about this to gain back some of my time spent mowing the yard, and I figured I'd bring you along with me, so let's get started. So one day as I was browsing YouTube, I came across this really cool looking robotic lawnmower called Luba made by Mammotion. Now it's rare that I reach out to a company and request to review their product, but it was something about this one that just looked like it would solve all my mowing problems. But as we all know, looks can be deceiving, so let's get this thing installed and see what it can do. But before we jump into setting this mower up, I really want to take a quick look at just how well this thing is built. It looks more like a race car than a robotic mower, but I like the design overall. It really has a simple but aggressive look to it, and I can tell a lot of time was spent determining what sensors to include and where to place them. This is also the first robotic mower that has all-wheel drive, which is another reason I was so interested. It also has a front suspension system, which I assume should help with mowing around rough terrain. The front Omni wheels are also something worth taking a closer look at. I've never seen wheels like this before in person, but as you can see, as I move the mower around, the smaller wheels near the bottom around each main wheel will also rotate. I'm assuming this helps with movement around different terrain as well, but we'll soon find out. So enough about the top, let's take a quick look underneath to see what's going on. Unlike other robotic mowers, the Luba has a dual cutting system with 8 razor blades, and that'll help speed up the cutting process. The cutting height can also be adjusted from their smartphone app. By design, the razor blades can freely rotate so that the mowing deck is not damaged if the blades bump into something hard. We can also get a better look at the total range of the front suspension system. Anyway, let's move on to getting everything set up, but before we do, let's go ahead and attach the front bumper that is used to detect obstacles. I first needed to get the charging base installed, which is how the robotic mower will automatically recharge itself when the battery is low. It should work similar to many robotic vacuums. Before securing the charging base, I assembled and installed the mounting pole for the antenna we'll talk about in a moment. To mount the charging base, the unit comes with screws made out of what looks like a hard plastic that basically screws into the soil. I have clay soil, so to help drive the screws, I used a large drill bit to loosen the soil some. I then installed what they call the RTK Reference Station. What's a RTK station, you ask? I had the same question. Well, apparently unlike other robotic lawnmowers, this mower does not require a boundary wire to be installed. According to their website, the RTK antenna I'm installing has access to 4 global navigation systems, and with the help from IMU sensors, this allows them to provide precise positioning accuracy for the mower to the centimeter level. Sounds fancy, but does it work? Well, sit tight as I definitely ran into some issues I'll explain later. Once the charging base and RTK antenna were installed and powered up, I went ahead and installed the optional Luba Garage, which just adds an additional layer of protection to Luba from long-term effects from rain and sun exposure. In order for the Luba to function, they include a key that must be inserted into the rear of the mower. While the Luba is powered off, there is no resistance on the wheels, and since my backyard has a large slope, during a power off test, my Luba ended up in a ditch when I took my eyes off of it for a few minutes. So for the sake of time, I just added some additional gravel to the front of the base, but I would definitely advise not skipping this important step of making sure the charging station has a flat surface. Once the base was level, it was finally time to power up the Luba. The entire setup process is done with Mammotion's smartphone app, which allows you to set up boundaries, no-go zones, set up cutting schedules, and more that we'll take a look at later. Apparently there was a software firmware update I needed to install before moving forward, but I won't bore you with watching that entire process, but it took about 14 minutes to complete. After the firmware upgrade was completed, I began creating my backyard's boundary line, which requires you to manually drive the Luba with the app around your yard. About 3/4 of the way, when I drove the Luba under some of my taller trees, I received a Luba locked message in the app. At the time, I was confused, as keep in mind this was my first time working with a GPS based robotic mower, and I really wasn't sure how this technology worked. After doing some research and talking with Mammotion support team, I learned that it's important that the Luba and RTK Reference Station have access to as much open sky as possible. So going under tall trees, a deck, or areas where the satellite signal may be weakened may cause issues. So this was my first mistake for not reading more about what areas to avoid. So I decided to reinstall my RTK Reference Station to a higher position where it had better access to the open sky, and I also temporarily relocated my charging base station to help improve Luba's satellite signals while it was docked. After making these changes and after trimming my Leyland cypress trees, I definitely noticed a huge signal improvement. I also learned the Luba and RTK are constantly communicating with each other and trying to communicate with the different satellites to help Luba navigate precisely. Also, even though my RTK station is mounted in the backyard, I should still be able to use the Luba in my front yard as long as Luba has enough satellite connections. So hopefully all that makes sense and is helpful to someone watching. Well, next I went ahead and finished mapping my front yard, and I noticed no signal issues, which was a good sign. Now, in order for the Luba to know how to properly get to my front yard from the backyard, I needed to create what they call a channel. Once the channel was completed, I went ahead and started the mowing process. So right now the video footage is playing at normal speed, so you can get a realistic idea for the default mowing speed, which can be changed in the app, but to prevent this video from being too long, later in the video I'll speed up the video footage. I was impressed to see how well Luba handled the edge of my sloped front yard. Now the Luba is supposed to be able to handle really steep slopes, which my front yard has, so I was really impressed to see how well it did. It's able to accomplish this mainly due to its all-wheel drive feature and the type of wheels used. This was one of my primary reasons I wanted to get my hands on this mower, since many other robotic mowers wouldn't be able to handle my front yard. Since Luba seemed to be doing its job without any major issues, I figured it was a good time to go ahead and knock out the weed eating and any other front yard work. I will say it was a nice experience to feel like I could focus on other tasks while Luba took care of the main mowing job. I can definitely get used to this. Another feature I liked is that unlike other robotic mowers that mow in a random pattern, Luba will mow in straight lines or in a checkerboard type fashion, which will give you a lawn that looks professional. This also speeds up the mowing process. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time making my front yard's boundary, so some of the lines were a little off, but that's something I'll probably tweak later on. So after Luba finished the first mowing task using the single grid mowing pattern, I wanted to test the double grid or checkerboard pattern, which will make Luba mow the grass vertically after mowing horizontally. After Luba was done mowing the front, I took a step back to see how well it did, and I must say I was impressed actually. It looked just like a regular, if not better, mowing job. But before I give my final thoughts, I want to test some of the other features just to be fair to all the other robotic mowers out there. First up, they mentioned Luba can handle up to 2 inches of vertical climbing, which I have no doubts about at this point, but I figured I'd still somewhat test it. The Omni wheels seem to be doing a really good job of handling the different terrain I have, plus not tearing up my lawn as the mower turns left and right. Let's see how well it handles obstacles. Considering it has 4 ultrasonic sensors and a front bumper to detect objects, I was pretty confident Luba would pass this test. Probably the most important feature when it comes to safety is the large red button. Let's make sure Luba actually stops when it's pressed. I like that you can restart the mower right from the mower also. The front suspension appears to be doing its job also. The terrain in my backyard is much rockier and uneven compared to my front yard, so it did a great job here as well. Now the Luba should automatically start to return to the charging base when it detects rain, and you can change this feature in the app. But after a few seconds of spraying it with water, it detected the water and started to make its way back to the charging base. I think because of the direction and force at which I was spraying it, it made it occasionally think it needed to avoid an obstacle, but after I left it alone, it eventually found its way back to the charging base. Now, what if someone just walks up and tries to steal the Luba? Well, once they pick up Luba, it should alert you on your phone, and once you pair it with your account, no one else can activate the Luba under another account, making the Luba worthless to them unless they sell it for parts. Now, since the Luba cannot be tracked in real time unless it's connected to the internet, I would recommend installing an Apple AirTag or something similar inside the Luba so you or the authorities can track it no matter if it's connected to the internet or not. So will Luba wake your neighbors? I highly doubt it. From the decibel readings I was getting from my smartphone app, my neighbors would never know Luba is at work, which is great if for some reason I wanted to mow the lawn at night. Now I really don't have any no-go zones in my backyard, such as a flower bed with no boundary or a picnic table for example, but I created a fake one with concrete blocks just to see how well Luba would avoid this area once I set up the no-go zone in the app. With some settings, Luba can be overly sensitive to taller grass, so for my backyard, I set the mowing settings for tall grass, which reduces how sensitive Luba is to objects in its path. Here's a quick look at my backyard before Luba completed mowing, and the grass back here is a little tall in certain areas, so it's definitely due for a cut, so let's see how Luba does. After looking at the time lapse, Luba definitely avoided the no-go zone like it should. The battery in this Luba version can last for about 2 hours on a single charge, so based on the time it seems to take Luba to cut my backyard, it should be able to handle cutting my front yard and backyard on a single charge. Again, similar to robot vacuums, when the battery gets low, the Luba will automatically return back to the charging base. So what's my final thoughts on the Luba? Overall, if you have a yard that does not have a lot of tall, thick trees, or if you have the option to mount the RTK Reference Station high off the ground away from obstacles such as on your home's roof, then the Luba may be a great choice if you're in the market for a robotic mower that doesn't require a boundary wire. However, this mower isn't on the cheap side just like most robotic mowers, and for the version I reviewed in this video, it would set you back about $2,000. Now, some may argue that that's the average cost of most low-end riding lawnmowers, so it really depends on how you look at it and what your needs are. Also, Mammotion is a fairly new company founded in 2022, but they appear to be actively engaged with the community, have loads of useful resources online, and have the option to remotely push software firmware updates as they aim to improve the Luba. Anyway, hopefully this video was useful for those interested in robotic mowers or interesting for those who are just now discovering this technology. Also, speaking about discovery, if you're just discovering this channel, you can watch some of my other videos by clicking the left video thumbnail, and for everyone else, YouTube thinks you may be interested in the video on the right. Well, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one.